There are 10,000 ways to die in the 41st millennium, and only one path that leads to eternal purpose. I was no stranger to death. On our feudal world of Helbrecht's Rest, boys became warriors at 12, men at 15, and corpses soon after. Raiders from the hills came down each season, and those too weak to raise a blade were left behind in the ashes. That was the way of things. But rumors whispered in the taverns and temples promised another destiny, one forged not in mud and fire, but in the armor of the Emperor's chosen. The Black Templars. I had seen them only once. Towering figures, clad in black plate that shimmered with the light of purity seals and the gleam of holy steel. They came down from the skies in a thunderous dropship, their vox-amplified voices shaking the very ground as they declared the need for recruits. Not conscripts. Not soldiers. Recruits. Candidates to become more than mortal. That day, I swore that I would be one of them. The chance did not come often. Generations could pass before a crusading fleet stopped upon our soil to replenish its ranks. But the year the sky tore open with fire and light, the year the great ships came, my 16th year, the trials began again. The priests of the ecclesiarchy told us that those chosen were not lucky, but burdened. For to serve the Black Templars was to surrender one's body, soul, and future. They would strip us bare, remake us in pain, and cast us into endless war without respite. The crusade never ends, the priest whispered as he marked my brow with sacred ash. The Emperor demands no less. Still, I could not deny the fire within me. To live and die as another nameless spearman, forgotten in a ditch, was no life at all. Better to risk everything for the slim chance of immortality, of becoming a blade in the Emperor's hand. When the chaplains came, the village bells tolled. Black-armored giants entered the square, their skull-faced helms glowering down at us. Behind them marched neophytes, half-armored squires who bore bolters across their backs and chainswords at their sides. I remember locking eyes with one of them, a boy perhaps only a year older than I was, his face scarred but proud. He had survived what I had yet to endure. That glance alone was enough to steel my resolve. The chaplain's voice thundered across the square, carried by Voxgrill and Faith alike, children of Helbrecht's Rest. The time has come. From among you, we shall find those fit to serve. The worthy will stand. The weak will fall. And the emperor's will shall be done. Mothers wept. Fathers held their sons' shoulders tight, as though they might hold them back from destiny itself. One by one, names were called. Boys of 15 and 16, hardened by years of battle with raiders, each stepping forward with fists clenched and eyes blazing. When my name was spoken, my knees almost buckled, but I forced myself forward. The chaplains looked upon us without pity. To them, we were not men, not yet. We were raw stone, to be chiseled into weapons, or shattered into dust. As night fell, we were gathered outside the village, 30 of us chosen from hundreds. Behind us, our families prayed. Ahead of us, the black-armored figures waited in silence, their crimson eye lenses glowing faintly in the darkness. I could feel the weight of judgment pressing down upon me, heavier than any shield I had ever borne. This was no longer a dream. This was the crucible of fate. From this moment, the chaplain growled, you are nothing. You will be tested. You will suffer. You will bleed. And should the emperor deem you unworthy, you will die. But if you endure, you may rise as more than men. You may rise as neophytes of the Black Templars. We knelt, some trembling, some weeping. I clenched my fists until the nails cut my palms. For in that instant, beneath the unyielding gaze of gods in black armor, I swore I would not falter. The first test began before dawn. We had been herded into the monastery ruins at the edge of the village, a place said to be consecrated by the first Templar who had set foot on Helbrecht's Rest centuries ago. The stones were cold and cracked, the air thick with incense smoke that clung to the back of the throat. 30 of us stood in silence, each clutching nothing but the ragged tunics on our backs. No food. No water. No weapons. The chaplain paced before us, his Crozius Arcanum humming faintly with caged energy. The weapon's every step sent sparks into the dust, and none of us dared to move as his skull helm swept across our line. You are children, his voice growled, amplified by Vox until it rattled our bones. The Black Templars have no use for children. Only the strong, the loyal, the faithful. Tonight, you will prove which you are. Behind him, neophytes laid out racks of worn practice blades. Rusted steel, nicked and scarred by countless trials before ours. I realized then what this would be. Pair off, the chaplain commanded. Strike until your opponent falls. There will be no surrender. There will be no mercy. The Emperor watches. A shiver ran through our ranks. We had fought raiders, beasts, even rival villages, but never each other. Yet hesitation was punished swiftly. One boy, barely 15, faltered as he stepped forward. A neophyte slammed the butt of his bolter into the boy's gut, dropping him to his knees. Unworthy, the chaplain intoned. Without another word, the boy was dragged away, his screams echoing into the night. The rest of us obeyed. My opponent was Jorik, a smith's son with arms thick from hammering steel. His eyes met mine with a mix of apology and resolve. We both knew only one of us could remain standing. The signal was given. Our blades clashed, sparks spitting into the dark. His strength nearly overwhelmed me in the first strike, the weight of his swing driving me back. But years of fighting raiders had taught me speed. I ducked under his follow-through, slashing across his arm. He grunted, blood spraying into the dust. We circled. The monastery echoed with the cries of combat, metal on metal, grunts of pain, the dull thud of bodies collapsing. I could taste iron on my tongue, whether from blood or fear I could not tell. Jorik came at me again, fury flashing in his eyes. He fought not just for himself but for the honor of his kin. His blade whistled past my cheek, close enough that I felt the air burn. I fainted low, then drove upward, catching him in the ribs. He gasped, staggered, but refused to fall. The chaplains watched in silence. Not a word of encouragement, not a flicker of emotion. Only judgment. It ended with a desperate lunge. Jorik raised his blade high, overextending. I drove my shoulder into his chest, slamming him to the ground. My blade pressed against his throat. For a heartbeat, we stared at each other, two boys torn between brotherhood and survival. I yield, he whispered. The neophyte overseeing us shook his head. There is no yielding. My hand trembled. Could I kill him? Could I end the life of someone who had stood beside me in the village square, who had shared bread and laughter only days before? Then I remembered the words, there is no mercy. To falter now was to die alongside him. With a cry, I drove the blade home. Jorik's blood pooled across the stones, his eyes wide with shock that slowly dulled to nothing. I staggered back, chest heaving, bile rising in my throat. The chaplain's voice thundered. One more step toward strength. I wanted to scream, to weep, but I forced my face to stillness, because weakness here was a death sentence. When the trial ended, only 19 of us remained. 11 boys lay dead upon the stones, their blood soaking into the ancient monastery floor. The chaplains did not look at them again. They were already forgotten. As the dawnlight broke through shattered stained glass, we were herded back into line. The chaplain's crozier struck the ground once more, the crack of energy shaking dust from the rafters. You have proven you can fight, he said, his voice like thunder. But war is more than blood. War is faith. Tonight, you faced men. Tomorrow, you will face yourselves. We were dismissed in silence, each of us carrying the weight of what we had done. My hands still shook. My tunic was stiff with Jorik's blood. Yet in the depths of my horror, something darker burned, a fire of grim resolve. I had survived the first trial, and I would survive the rest. They woke us before the stars had fully faded. The night's slaughter still clung to my skin, dried blood cracking across my knuckles as I struggled to rise. There had been no rest. Only whispers of what was to come, the oath of blood. We were led back into the monastery ruins, where the corpses of the fallen had been cleared away. Their absence felt heavier than their bodies had. The stones still glistened dark in places where blood had pooled, and the air reeked of copper and incense. The chaplains stood in a half-circle around us, black-armored silhouettes in the faint glow of oil braziers. One by one, neophytes carried forward iron bowls filled with burning coals. From the flames, the chaplains drew long ritual blades, straight-edged and gleaming, inscribed with litanies of loyalty. The lead chaplain's vox-grill growled as he raised his weapon high. The Emperor demands faith proven not by words, but by blood. You will swear your loyalty, not to yourselves, not to your kin, but to him on terror, eternal and undying. This oath is sacred. Once given, it binds you until your last breath. We were forced to kneel in the ash. The smell of smoke stung my nose as the chaplain moved down the line, his shadow stretching across us like a shroud. Each boy was commanded to slice his palm, spilling blood onto the blade. The chaplain then pressed the blooded weapon to his own armor, marking it with crimson. When my turn came, my hands trembled. The blade was heavier than I expected, its edge wicked sharp. I drew it across my palm, hissing as pain lanced through me. Blood welled, hot and bright, dripping onto the steel. The chaplain took the blade back, pressing it against his chest plate. My blood joined 1,000 others smeared across that ancient armor, a tapestry of oaths spanning centuries. "Kneel, child of man," he intoned. "Whose life do you serve?" "The Emperor's," I rasped, my throat dry. "And whose blood will you shed?" "Mine, until he commands otherwise." The chaplain's crimson lenses burned into me for a long moment. Then he nodded once, moving on. But the ritual did not end with blood alone. The oath demanded combat, proof that the words were not hollow. After every boy swore, we were again paired off, not as enemies, but as brothers in testing. Our blades were dipped into the coals until they glowed faintly red, then returned to us. The command was simple: wound each other deeply enough that the scar would remain forever. My partner this time was a boy named Kestel, lean and sharp-eyed, with the grim calm of someone who had already made peace with death. He held out his arm without hesitation. I slashed across it, the blade searing as much as it cut, filling the air with the smell of burnt flesh. He did not flinch. When it was my turn, I bared my forearm, heart pounding. Kestel drew the blade across it in one swift motion. Fire exploded through my veins, and my vision swam. But I clenched my jaw and forced myself to meet his eyes, refusing to cry out. We both bled into the ash at our feet. The chaplain surveyed us, satisfied. "These wounds will remain as reminders," one intoned. "Your flesh is no longer your own. It belongs to the Emperor, and to his crusade. Should you betray your oath, your blood will condemn you." When the trial ended, we staggered back into line, our arms wrapped in rough bandages. Pain throbbed with each heartbeat, a constant echo of the vow we had made. Yet beneath the agony, something strange stirred within me: pride. For the first time, I felt not just a candidate, but something closer to the neophytes who watched us with silent approval. The oath of blood had been sealed. There would be no turning back. Sleep was a stranger that night. Every throb of my burned flesh reminded me of the oath I had sworn, each heartbeat hammering the words deeper into my bones. Some boys wept quietly, clutching their bandaged arms as though they could hide from the weight of destiny. I stared into the shadows above the monastery rafters, knowing tomorrow would demand more than blood. It would demand our very souls. The chaplains gathered us at dawn, their forms wreathed in smoke from the braziers. This time, robed figures accompanied them, sanctioned psychers, their faces hidden behind bronze masks etched with warding runes. Even the neophytes shifted uneasily at their presence. "Faith without trial is worthless," the lead chaplain declared. "Steel without fire is brittle. Today, you face the purity trials. Your flesh has been tested. Now your spirit must be scourged." The psychers raised their staffs, and the air grew heavy, humming with unnatural resonance. My teeth ached. My skin crawled. The warp seeped into the room like a tide of unseen claws, dragging whispers into the back of my skull. We were placed in a circle, kneeling upon the cold stones. One by one, each candidate was forced to face illusions pulled from the depths of their own minds. The chaplains would watch, and judge whether faith could withstand the corruption of the warp. The first boy screamed within moments. His eyes rolled back, and he clawed at his own face as though something were crawling beneath his skin. The chaplain ended his cries with a single, merciful strike of the crozius. The second faced his vision silently, shaking but unbroken. He staggered away pale and hollow-eyed, yet still alive. Approval flickered in the chaplain's stance, subtle but real. When my turn came, the psycher's masked face turned toward me. The staff lowered. Heat rippled across my skin, then cold pierced straight to the marrow. My vision twisted, the monastery walls dissolving into a nightmare of fire and shadow. I stood on the village plain, but everything was wrong. The sky bled crimson, the ground cracked with rivers of molten iron. My family knelt before me, their faces twisted and broken, crying out in voices that were not theirs. Behind them rose a figure clad in black, horned and monstrous, eyes burning with unnatural light. "Why fight?" it whispered, its voice slithering into my mind like poison. "The Emperor is a corpse. His dream is dust. Serve us, and you will know power beyond pain. The whispers clawed at me, promising release from fear, from suffering, from the endless trials. My father's twisted form reached out, begging me to choose life over death. My mother wept blood. I wanted to fall to my knees, to end the torment. But through the storm of lies, one truth seared brighter than fire: the Emperor was watching. Even if I could not see him, even if he never spoke, his light was there. And it demanded faith. I clenched my fists, raising my blooded forearm high. The Emperor is my strength, I shouted into the abyss. Your lies are nothing. The demon hissed, its face unraveling into smoke. The village dissolved. The heat died away. I was back on the cold stone floor, my body trembling and sweat pouring down my face. The psyker withdrew his staff. The chaplain loomed over me, silent. For a long moment, I feared I had failed, that I had been too slow, too weak. Then his gauntlet touched my shoulder with surprising weight. Faith endures, he rumbled. I staggered back into line, my heart still racing, the whispers of the warp echoing faintly at the edge of my thoughts. Some boys had fallen. Some survived, hollow-eyed. But all of us carried scars now, unseen but no less real than those carved into our flesh. The purity trials had stripped away comfort, illusions, and doubt. What remained was raw belief, or the emptiness that would soon consume the weak. We were allowed no respite after the purity trials. The chaplain said that hesitation bred weakness, and weakness had no place in the service of the Emperor. So before the bruises faded, before the sweat of warped visions dried upon our brows, we were cast into the trial of silence. It began with a march into the monastery catacombs. The air grew colder as we descended, each step echoing against stone carved before our great-grandfathers were born. Flickering lumen strips cast faint light across walls etched with scripture and the names of martyrs. The neophytes herded us forward until we reached a hall with no doors, no windows, only the faint smell of oil and dust. This chamber will be your crucible, the chaplain intoned, his vox grill a thunderous growl. Here, you will sit in silence. No food, no water, no light. You will endure until we decide otherwise. In the dark, you will hear the Emperor's voice, or you will hear nothing at all. The neophytes extinguished the lumen strips. Darkness swallowed us whole. The air was thick, unmoving, stinking faintly of mold. Then the sound of heavy boots retreated, the great door sealing shut with a deafening clang. The silence was unbearable at first. We were 30 once, 19 now, but in that black pit, even 19 breaths seemed too loud. I could hear hearts pounding, gulps of dry throats, the occasional nervous shuffle. But soon even that faded. The chaplains had forbidden speech, and none dared risk discovery. Hours blurred. My wounds itched. My mouth dried until each swallow felt like fire. In the dark, thoughts grew louder than screams. Memories of Jorik's death clawed at me. The whispers from the purity trial returned, faint but persistent. Why suffer? Why starve? There is no salvation here. I pressed my forehead to the cold stone and forced myself to pray. Not in whispers, silently, in the depths of my mind. I recited every catechism I had learned from the priests of the ecclesiarchy, every phrase of loyalty I could recall. Still, doubt gnawed at the edges of my resolve. Time lost all meaning. The darkness weighed heavier than chains, crushing the spirit. A boy somewhere to my left began to sob softly, muffled into his sleeve. Hours later, the sob ceased. Whether he had found strength or slipped into death, I could not tell. When the door finally opened, the light was blinding. We stumbled forward, blinking, gaunt and weak. Of the 19 who had entered, only 15 emerged. For shapes were carried out on stretchers, their faces pale and still. The chaplain regarded us with cold satisfaction. You have endured silence. You have stared into the void and not broken. But war is no silent vigil. Tomorrow, you will face the fire. I swayed on my feet, body trembling with hunger and exhaustion. And yet, beneath the weakness, something fierce stirred. Each trial stripped us down further, but it also revealed a core that could not be destroyed. For the first time, I understood. These ordeals were not just cruelty. They were forging us into weapons sharper than steel. The fire was no metaphor. We were herded into the Hall of Ash, a cavernous chamber deep within the fortress monastery. The walls were scorched black, the floor cracked from countless trials before ours. Great braziers lined the edges, filling the air with the heat of burning promethium. The smoke burned our lungs before the trial even began. The chaplain's voice thundered from the dais, every syllable dripping with grim authority. You have endured silence. Now endure fire. Steel breaks in flame unless tempered. Flesh sears. Bone cracks. Only the soul forged in agony endures. Only then can you bear the mantle of crusader. Behind him, neophytes dragged in cages. From them spilled beasts captured from a nearby death world, scaled horrors with barbed limbs, hissing like broken engines. My heart stuttered. We had no armor. Only crude practice blades and our own resolve. The command came, enter the circle. Heat pressed against us like a living thing as the braziers roared higher. The first 3 initiates stepped forward. The beasts lunged, claws glinting in the firelight. The chamber erupted in screams, steel against scale, the sickening sound of bone snapping. I tried not to watch, but the chaplain's gaze forced our eyes open. There was no looking away. One boy fell, chest torn open. Another struck down his foe, only to collapse from blood loss moments later. The third fought like a man possessed, driving his blade through the beast's skull before collapsing unconscious, still clutching the hilt. My turn came sooner than I wanted. The heat was suffocating as I entered the circle. The beast before me was massive, jaws dripping venom that hissed when it struck the stone. My legs wanted to run. Instead, I raised the blade. It lunged. I barely rolled aside, the impact shaking the floor. The air reeked of sulfur and scorched skin as the fire singed my arm. I swung wildly, sparks flying off its armored hide. The chaplain's words rang in my skull, only the soul forged in agony endures. So I embraced the agony. The beast raked my thigh, hot blood spilling down my leg. I screamed, not in fear, but in fury, and drove the blade into its eye. It shrieked, thrashing, dragging me to the floor. My ribs cracked under its weight. Firelight filled my vision. With the last of my strength, I twisted the blade deeper. The beast shuddered and went still. I lay there panting, half blinded by smoke, blood soaking the floor beneath me. The chaplain's shadow loomed over me. He did not praise me. He did not scorn me. He simply nodded once, a gesture colder than any words. By the time the trial ended, only 12 of us remained. 7 had perished in the fire, burned, torn, or broken beyond saving. Their bodies were dragged away, unceremoniously fed to the flames. The Emperor accepts their sacrifice, the chaplain said flatly. As the braziers dimmed and the smoke thinned, I realized something had changed. The fear was still there, yes, but it no longer ruled me. Pain, fire, and death had become as common as breath. I was no longer the same boy who had stepped into the Hall of Ash. But the chaplains were far from finished. They promised us a final ordeal. One that would strip away not just body, not just will, but the very soul. The fortress monastery fell into silence that night. No bells, no chants, no sound but the scrape of boots and the occasional murmur of prayer. 12 of us remained, our bodies battered, our minds half-broken, yet our spirits unyielding. At dawn, the chaplain summoned us to the chamber of the oath. It was unlike any place we had seen. The walls were carved with scripture, each line etched deep into stone as if the words themselves were meant to bleed. Candles filled the chamber, their smoke curling upward to form a veil between us and the towering statues of saints that loomed above. In the center stood a single altar of black marble, upon which rested chained relics, shards of broken swords, cracked helmets, a rosarius burned and twisted from war. The chaplain spoke in a voice that seemed to echo inside my skull. The fire has tempered your flesh. Now your spirit will be judged. Speak your oath, or perish. One by one, we stepped forward. The first initiate raised his hand to the Emperor's sigil. His voice shook, but his words carried conviction. I swear eternal crusade against the alien, the mutant, the heretic. My life is his, my blood is his, my death is his. The chaplain watched him with eyes like cold steel. A moment's pause, then a curt nod. The initiate was dragged aside by an Astartes, led deeper into the fortress. The next boy faltered. His words came too slow, his fear too visible. The chaplain's crozius crackled once, and his skull split like glass under divine judgment. No prayer was offered. No burial promised. His body was dragged from the chamber, leaving behind only a streak of blood that soaked into the stone. My turn came. The air was suffocating, heavy with incense and the iron tang of blood. My knees wanted to buckle, but I forced myself forward. I laid my hand upon the sigil, the cold metal biting into my skin. I spoke not quickly, nor slowly, but with the weight of certainty. I swear eternal war in the Emperor's name. I renounce peace, comfort, and life itself. Let my soul be ground to dust before I betray his crusade. From this day until my death, I am his sword, his shield, his wrath. Silence followed. The chaplain's gaze bored into me like a blade. For a heartbeat, I feared I had failed. Then, with the faintest tilt of his head, he signaled acceptance. The weight lifted from my chest, but only barely. We left that chamber diminished again. From 12, only 8 remained. That night, as we sat in silence, I thought of those who had fallen, boys I had trained beside, who had fought and bled in the fire with me. Their names would not be remembered. Their families would never know. Only the Emperor knew their sacrifice. But I also knew this. I was no longer merely surviving. I was becoming. The chaplain had promised one final trial. Rumors whispered among us that it was no test of words, nor flame, nor beasts. It was something deeper. Something that struck at the very soul. And in my heart, though I would never admit it aloud, I feared that this last test would not only break some of us. It would damn us forever. The chaplain's promise came swiftly. Before dawn, bells thundered through the fortress monastery, their sound vibrating through stone and bone alike. We were torn from uneasy sleep, assembled in silence, and marched in single file through corridors lit only by flickering torches. Each step echoed like the tolling of a funeral dirge. None of us spoke. None dared. At last, the doors opened to reveal the sanctum of ashes. The chamber was vast, a cathedral hollowed from black stone. The walls were engraved with battle scenes, Templars locked in eternal struggle against orcs, tyranids, traitors. But the floor was what drew my eyes, a great circle inscribed with runes of purity and warding, each groove filled with sacred ash. The air hung heavy with the smell of burnt incense, wax, and something else, an undercurrent of charred flesh, old and lingering. The chaplain stood at the far end, Crozius clutched in gauntleted hands. At his side, a towering apothecary in black and white armor held a case of instruments that glinted cruelly in the dim light. Behind them, a reliquary shone faintly, sealed in chains. "This is your last trial," the chaplain intoned, his voice rolling like thunder. "The trial of faith. Flesh has been tested, will has been measured, but the soul must be purged of weakness. Only then will you be deemed worthy to serve the eternal crusade." The apothecary's vox grill hissed as he opened the case. Inside were syringes filled with viscous black fluid, their tips gleaming like venomous fangs. My stomach twisted. We knew what they contained, the first gene seed of the Black Templars, drawn from the Primarch's legacy. One by one, we were summoned to kneel. The first initiate bared his neck. The needle sank in with a hiss, and his body convulsed instantly. He screamed, his muscles seizing, his veins darkening as the genetic essence invaded his blood. We watched as his skin blistered, then calmed, then finally stilled. He breathed again, alive, changed. The next initiate was not so fortunate. As the black fluid coursed through him, his body twisted, spasming uncontrollably. His screams curdled into gurgles, then silence. The apothecary withdrew the needle, shook his head once, and dragged the corpse aside. We had seen death before. But this death was worse. It was not from fire or steel, but rejection by the very blood of dawn. When my turn came, I stepped forward with as much calm as I could muster. The apothecary's hand pressed down on my shoulder like iron, forcing me to my knees. The needle entered. Pain, raw, searing, like molten metal flooding my veins. My chest constricted, my vision swam, my bones felt as though they were splitting open. My scream was silent, my throat locked as if strangled by unseen chains. But amid the agony, something else stirred. A presence. A voice not of words, but of will. Harsh, unyielding, relentless. It demanded submission. It demanded loyalty. It demanded surrender of all that I was. In that abyss, I thought of my village, my family, the faces of those who had died beside me. I thought of fire, of oaths, of brothers dragged into silence. And I yielded, not to the pain, but to him. To the Emperor. When my vision cleared, I was on the floor, gasping, drenched in sweat. But alive. Changed. The chaplain's eyes locked on me. His voice cut the silence. "Rise, neophyte." I did. Of the 8 who entered that chamber, only 5 walked out. But even as we staggered into the corridor, our bodies trembling with transformation, I knew this was not the end. We were closer to becoming Templars, but still unproven. Because faith tested once can always be tested again. The world beyond the Sanctum of Ashes looked different. The fortress monastery's walls loomed the same, its banners still whispered with draughts of unseen air, but for me, every sound, every shadow felt sharpened, alive. My senses were no longer those of a boy. The gene seed burned within me, remaking every breath, every heartbeat. But the Black Templars were not satisfied. Survival was not enough. We 5 were marched into the Hall of Blades, a chamber vast as a cathedral, lined wall to wall with weapon racks. Swords of every make, crude chainswords, elegant power blades, ancient relics heavy with history, hung in neat order, gleaming in the torchlight. Armor fragments lay upon stands, scarred by war and ritual. At the center stood 3 initiates, full Black Templars clad in black plate. Their helms were wrought in the shape of snarling visages, their presence suffocating. Between them rested an altar upon which lay 5 swords, each forged differently, none less than deadly. The chaplain's voice echoed from behind us. The Emperor's crusade requires more than faith. It requires skill. Choose your blade. Face your brothers. Prove you are worthy to carry steel in his name. We obeyed. My hand fell upon a long sword of crude iron, its edge worn but balanced. It felt right, not elegant, not adorned, but weighty, like judgment itself. The duels began. The first match was swift. 2 initiates circled, blades flashing in the dim light. One struck hard, reckless, while the other parried with patience. A single opening appeared, and blood followed. The loser fell, his throat opened, gasping until silence took him. No medic moved to intervene. The dead had failed their proof. I fought next. My opponent was taller, stronger, his blade an ancient chainsword that roared with each swing. Sparks erupted as his first strike crashed against mine, the force rattling my bones. I staggered back, breath heaving, the weight of failure pressing like a shadow. But training, instinct, faith, all surged within me. I remembered the trial of fire, where hesitation meant death. I remembered the trial of beasts, where fear was my greatest enemy. And I remembered the trial of faith, where surrender meant obliteration. This time, I did not yield. I let him press, let his strength burn itself out in wild, furious strikes. Each time he swung, I turned, sidestepped, let his power cut air. When his arm grew slow, I struck. My blade found the seam of his shoulder. The crack of bone, the spray of blood, the roar of his scream, then silence. The chaplain's voice thundered. Kill, or die. The Emperor requires no weak sword bearers. I drove my blade into his heart. His body spasmed once, then went limp, sliding to the ground. I stood over him, chest heaving, blade dripping. I was alive. More than alive. The duels ended. Of 5, only 3 remained. 3 survivors, 3 blades, 3 oaths to be sharpened further still. But as the chaplain studied us, I saw no pride in his eyes. Only hunger. Only the promise of trials yet to come. For in the Black Templars, survival was never the end. It was only the beginning. We 3 survivors were given no time to recover. Our wounds still wept blood, our muscles trembled from the duels, yet the Black Templars dragged us into the next crucible. The Hall of Silence. It was nothing like the chambers before. No statues, no relics, no chanting hymns. Just darkness. Stone walls closed and tied around us, and the only light came from flickering candles, their flames struggling against the suffocating air. The chaplain's voice echoed low and steady. Steel may cut flesh. Faith may defy fire. But temptation can shatter the soul. In the name of the Emperor, prove that no heresy will sway you. The test was not of combat, but of spirit. We were each locked in separate cells, sealed by runes and iron. My chamber was barren but for a slab of stone and a single book, bound in cracked leather. Its cover bore no sigil of the Imperium. My stomach clenched the moment I saw it. The script across its face shimmered faintly, words I could not read, yet somehow understood. Whispers began. At first soft, like wind through ruins. Then louder, voices overlapping, promising rest, power, vengeance. My skin crawled as the shadows seemed to move. The book pulsed faintly with light, and the whispers shaped themselves into a single thought. Why die for a God who never answers? Take strength. Take freedom. Take truth. I shut my eyes. I thought of the chaplain, of the Crozius cracking skulls, of the fire that burned weakness away. I forced the voices back with prayer, whispering the litany of hate until my throat cracked. Hours passed. Days, perhaps. Time lost meaning. At one point, the whispers changed. They took my father's voice, then my mother's, then the cries of friends lost in the trials. Each one begged me to listen, to open the book, to see the truth hidden from the Imperium's lies. I pressed my forehead against the stone floor, bleeding as I whispered, "No. The Emperor is my truth. The Emperor is my father, my mother, my blood. No other." The whispers became shrieks. The book's cover split like a mouth, teeth of inked parchment gnashing. Darkness poured from it, reaching toward me with tendrils of shadow. My heart thundered, but I did not move. I recited the oath I had sworn in the Chamber of Ashes until the words filled every corner of my mind. Then the darkness recoiled. The book burst into flame, vanishing in a hiss of smoke. Silence fell, heavy and absolute. The cell door opened. The chaplain stood there, eyes like burning coals. He said only one word, "Endure." I stepped out, trembling but alive. Of the other two, only one remained. The third cell was silent, sealed. When the door opened, his body lay curled on the floor, his eyes black, his lips whispering words not of the Emperor. He was dragged away without ceremony. Now there were two of us. Two souls left who had faced fire, beasts, blade, and temptation, and still stood unbroken. But the chaplain's gaze told me the truth. Even now, even after everything, one more test awaited. The hardest of all. Because in the Black Templars, an initiate must be more than loyal. He must be ready to sacrifice everything. We too were summoned at dawn, though the sky outside was hidden by the fortress monastery's stone bulk. The chaplain awaited us in a hall lined with burning braziers. Shadows danced across the walls like spectres, and the air was thick with the smell of incense and oil. No sermon was given this time. No ritual words, no prayers to lead us into courage. Only silence. Behind the chaplain stood a Black Templar initiate, armored in black plate, helm under one arm, sword in the other. His expression was cold, unreadable. His eyes fixed on us with something close to pity. The chaplain's voice broke the silence like a hammer. "One of you is unworthy." The words struck harder than any blade. My companion and I exchanged a glance, fear, shock, and dawning horror mirrored in his eyes. The chaplain pointed his Crozius toward us. "The Emperor does not need two. The crusade requires only the strong, the resolute, the merciless. To prove yourselves, you will fight, not as brothers, but as rivals. Only one of you shall take the oath of Templar." My breath caught in my chest. After all we had endured together, the fire, the beasts, the darkness, they would turn us against each other. The initiate stepped forward, placing two blades at our feet. One was a crude training sword, its edge dulled but still lethal. The other was a short, jagged dagger, fit more for murder than honor. My companion's voice cracked as he whispered, "Brother, we don't have to." The chaplain's Crozier sparked, striking the floor. His voice thundered, "There is no brotherhood in weakness. Choose, or die together as failures." I looked at the blades. My hand trembled as it hovered. In that moment, I remembered the trial of silence, the whispers in the dark, the voices promising freedom. They had begged me to betray the Emperor, to seek another path. I had denied them. Now, the Emperor himself demanded this. I chose the sword. My companion chose the dagger. The duel began. He struck first, desperation driving him forward. The dagger flashed, grazing my arm, leaving a trail of blood. His face twisted with fury and sorrow both, his voice breaking as he cried out, "I won't die here. Not after everything." We clashed again and again, each blow ringing like a death knell. His strikes were fast, wild, driven by fear. Mine were heavy, deliberate, guided by the memory of every trial that had brought me here. At last, I caught his wrist, twisted, and heard the snap of bone. The dagger clattered to the floor. He fell to his knees, gasping, eyes wide with terror and pleading. "Brother, please. I raised the sword. My chest felt like it would split in two. But the chaplain's words echoed in my skull. There is no brotherhood in weakness. The blade fell. Blood spattered across the stone. His body crumpled, lifeless. Silence reigned. The chaplain stepped forward, his gaze unflinching. You have chosen as the Emperor wills. You are his sword. His wrath. His Templar. The initiate behind him bowed his head slightly, as though in acknowledgement. I stood there, the weight of death heavy in my hands. I was the last. The sole survivor. But in the Black Templars, to survive was not triumph. It was a burden. A burden I would carry until my final breath. The fortress monastery's bells tolled as if to mark the death of my last companion. Their sound rolled through the stone halls, not in mourning, but in grim acknowledgement. One more life offered, one more soul extinguished for the sake of the eternal crusade. I was led alone through torchlit corridors, my blood drying on my armor, my mind still echoing with the face of the one I had slain. At last, I was brought to the sanctum of binding. This chamber was unlike the others. Where the trial of faith had been ash and blood, and the trial of silence had been shadows and whispers, this place radiated solemnity. The walls were lined with relics, shattered banners that had once flown over crusades, broken weapons that had slain enemies beyond counting. Candles burned by the hundreds, filling the room with a choking haze of smoke. At the far end stood the chaplain, his crozius resting across his chest. Beside him loomed the marshal himself, a towering figure clad in ornate black armor, the white cross of the Templars blazing across his chestplate. His very presence bent the air around him, as if gravity itself obeyed his will. My knees threatened to buckle. This was no trial. This was judgment. The chaplain spoke first. You have endured fire. You have faced beasts. You have resisted the warp. You have slain your brother. All of this was to strip away the boy, and reveal the warrior. The marshal's voice followed, deep and resonant. But you are not yet one of us. Words and blood alone are not enough. You must be bound to the eternal crusade. From this moment, your life is not your own. You will take the vows that have guided us since dawn. You will become a knight of the Black Templars, or you will perish with your oath unsworn. The chaplain placed a relic blade before me, its edge chipped, its hilt wrapped in tattered cloth. I recognized it at once. It was the sword carried by one of the fallen during the trial of blades. I knelt, pressing my forehead to the cold stone, my hands wrapped around the blade's hilt. The marshal began the litany of vows. His words thundered through the chamber. Do you swear never to rest, until every heretic is burned from the stars? I swear. Do you swear never to question the will of the Emperor, nor doubt his servants, nor falter in his sight? I swear. Do you swear to crusade across the stars, to kill and to die, never seeking peace, never desiring comfort, never knowing rest? I swear. The chaplain's crozius blazed with light, striking the floor so hard the chamber shook. Then rise, neophyte. Rise as the Emperor's sword. Rise as the Black Templar sun. I lifted the blade. My arms trembled, not with weakness, but with the weight of what I had sworn. My name, my past, my family, my life, all of it was gone. There was only the oath. Only the crusade. The marshal's gauntleted hand touched my shoulder, a gesture as heavy as a mountain. His voice was final, absolute. From this day, you are ours. Your soul belongs to the Emperor. Your blade belongs to the crusade. Your life belongs to the Black Templars. For the first time since the trials began, I felt something close to triumph. Not joy, not peace, but certainty. I was bound. Dawn broke over the fortress like a blade drawn across the sky, pale, sudden, and impossible to ignore. The bells tolled not in mourning now but in herald. Today was the day the sanctum of binding had promised, the day the last formalities would be performed and the neophyte would step into a black breastplate that would never fully come off again. The chamber for the rite had been prepared with obsessive care. Candles ringed the dais in concentric circles. Their wax a pale sea beneath serried icons of the Emperor and ancient battle sigils. A servo-skull hovered at the height of my head, its glass eye whirring as it recorded the ceremony and ticked the litany of names into the chapter's archive. An auspex sat on a tripod nearby, its lenses focused on my vitals, every heartbeat, cadence of breath, and the faint afterglow of gene seed integration to be catalogued and logged. Technology and ritual braided together here. The Black Templars did not squander the tools of Mars, even as they spat sanctified fury at the galaxy. The Marshal stood upon the dais, black cloak falling from broad shoulders, the white Maltese cross centered over iron armor. At his side, the chaplain recited litanies in a voice that scraped like flint, and the apothecary flanked them with instruments of stable steel and sacred purpose. Around the chamber, a ring of hardened veterans, Templars, sergeants, a squad of veterans whose armor bore the pocks and burns of 1,000 crusades, watched with an intensity I'd come to recognize as professional appraisal. I understood the look. In their eyes I was raw material, and they were craftsmen, judging whether the grain would take steel. They led me forward. First came the cleansing. A neophyte veteran, someone I'd glimpsed in the trials, whose family I had never known but whose presence had steadied me, wiped my face with oil steeped in blessed herbs. The scent of juniper and rust filled my nostrils. He spoke no words, only the simple application of the cross across my forehead, a tactile syllable that sealed 1,000 whispered prayers into the skin. Next, the chaplain intoned the litany of tempering. He spoke of dawn, of duty, of the crucible of manhood, and with each invocation veterans tapped the flat of their blades against my shoulders. The sound was percussive, ironstone met steel, and it settled into me like the rhythm of march. The Marshal then read aloud the chronicle of my trials in samba cadence, naming Jorik and the others who had been consumed by ash and flame. No glossing, no euphemism. Each name landed with the weight of accusation and blessing. Their memory was an anvil upon which my future would be hammered. The apothecary stepped forward to confirm the gene seed stabilization. He was a man of few smiles and many remedies, needles and gauze, data slate, and grim, efficient hands. He brought forth a needle the size of a child's bone and, with the practiced gentleness of someone who had both saved and culled, scanned the bloom of my bloodstream with an illuminated stylus. The auspex chimed a clean tone. Integration had held. A low murmur of approval rustled through the veterans like wind through banners. This was competence porn in its coldest form, specialists moving like gears in an enormous machine. The apothecary adjusted a clamp on the server skull, the tech scribe recorded the vitals with fingers that did not tremble, and the chaplain's voice never faltered even when it described the harshest of my deeds. Each man knew his ritual, his cadence, his blade. Each performed it flawlessly. In this, I felt the strange relief of being shepherded by professionals. It mattered. In war, the slightest mistake meant scrubbed bone. Then came the investiture. An armored sergeant stepped forward bearing a cloak of heavy black wool, its inner lining embroidered with sigils of the chapter and the crimson cross of their last crusade. He drew it around my shoulders and pinned it with a brooch forged from the broken blade of a crusader long dead. The Marshal presented the sword, my sword, a blade tempered by the Hall of Blades, its edge honed by the blood of those who had fallen. It felt right in my hand, neither ornate nor gentle, but balanced like a verdict. The chaplain unsheathed the crozius, touching its haft to my brow. By the Emperor's will and Dawn's might, he intoned, we bind you to the crusade. Let the cross on your chest be the brand that keeps you from the shadows. He drove the crozius into the floor. The vibration thrummed through bone and heart alike. The sanctuary's air seemed to pulse with power. As my hand closed on the sword, a veteran stepped forward and fitted a chainmail coif embroidered with a tiny chastity cross across my throat, a symbol not of chastity in a domestic sense but of the vow to remain unswerving in purpose. Around my wrist they placed a thin iron chain etched with sigils. Later, they would bind it to my armor so it could never be removed. The symbolism was clinical and brutal. No private life, no softening comforts. I was being shorn of any possibility but service. Then the Marshal leaned close, his voice a gravelled thing just for me. You have been forged in ash, tempered in flame, bound by blood. Know this, today is not an arrival but a beginning. Your first war waits. A barony on the edge of tyrannid space. The vox threads are lit. You leave in 3 rotations. The words landed colder than any blade ever could. 3 rotations. 3 hours in the nomenclature of the fortress. I felt the old panic at betrayal flare. Had I been swallowed whole by the vow only to be spat immediately into slaughter? Yet under the panic, something else rose, a wary professional calm. This is how it was. The Black Templars did not grant a long honeymoon to their new sons. They baptized them in blood and threw them into the sea of war to see if they would swim. A chaplain stepped forward then, sliding a palm across my helmet and whispering a single phrase that felt like a benediction and a threat. Remember Jorik. Remember the fires. Remember why we do not rest. He pressed a small reliquary into my hand, Inside lay a sliver of bone wrapped in linen, a reminder of the cost of failure. It was not morbid. It was motivational calculus, an instruction by grief. I knelt, bowed my head, and offered the final words of the pledge. My voice did not quaver. Behind me, the servo-skull recorded, the auspex logged, and the archive grew another data entry, a new life consigned to the crusade. When I rose, the veteran's eyes were like hard coals, approval, but not softness. They gestured for me to depart, to prepare my gear, and a scribe handed me a list, a manifest of weapons, rations, and an assignment. 3rd Company, Marshal's banner. Planet fall within the hour. There was no tenderness in the Marshal's farewell. Only a nod, the kind that measured you against an eternal standard and found you wanting in some private way but sufficient for now. That nod settled like lead in my gut and ironed resolve into my spine. I left the sanctum anointed, armored, and terrified, prepared in the way the Black Templars prepare a blade, sharpened, oiled, and thrust immediately into the grindstone. Not all who stood in that sanctum walked out clothed in black. For every one like me, sworn into the brotherhood, there were those who faltered. Some broke in the trials of body and soul, their corpses stacked and burned as offerings to the Emperor's stern ledger. Others failed in quieter ways, gene seed rejected, mind frayed by warp hallucinations, or spirit cracked beneath the relentless hammer of Chaplin's interrogation. Their names were not heralded, but their endings were no less part of the chapter's story. I saw it with my own eyes before my initiation. A boy named Malric, broad-shouldered and fierce in combat, had shown promise through every trial. But during the crucible of pain, his body convulsed and rejected the implants. The apothecaries fought for hours to stabilize him, but the monitors sang the dirge of failure. He lay pale and still, his breath shallow, eyes wide with a fear I had not seen since we were children. Malric was not permitted to die as a broken thing. The chaplain stood over him, Crozius gleaming with sanctity, and delivered the Emperor's mercy. One swift blow, a prayer, and Malric's blood soaked the chamber floor. His remains were consigned to the pyres that roared in the fortress courtyard, flames snapping his soul skyward in judgment. Others, though, were not granted even that dignity. Those who faltered in faith, who whispered doubts when interrogated, met an uglier fate. The Black Templars do not tolerate weakness of spirit. The chaplains judged them heretic-tainted, and the veterans dragged them away. I never saw those boys again. Rumors whispered they were fed into the training pits as live prey for the chapter's beasts, or turned into servitors, lobotomized shells stripped of all but the most basic function. Whatever the truth, it was grim enough that none dared ask aloud. Even those who survived implantation could face rejection. Some were deemed unworthy of the Templars' path, their bodies strong but their souls found lacking. Those few were sent back to the chapter's menial ranks, doomed to live out their days as thralls, carrying armor, maintaining vehicles, or polishing relics they would never wield. I caught glimpses of them in the fortress, men with haunted eyes, strong arms wasted on labor, forever close to greatness but never part of it. They were the reminder carved into flesh, service without glory, faith without brotherhood. The price of failure was not only personal. Families of the fallen were stripped of honor, their names erased from the records of their worlds. To birth a son who failed the Templars' trials was a shame few lineages could bear. Villages whispered, banners were lowered, and dynasties that had hoped for prestige crumbled to dust. The Black Templars demanded much, and the galaxy itself exacted its due from those who could not pay in blood and fire. In the fortress, we initiates whispered these truths to one another in hushed tones. Every cough during the night, every hesitation in a chaplain's gaze, carried the weight of doom. The knowledge was as heavy as the chains across our wrists. We were never more than a breath away from joining the ranks of the forgotten. Yet in that fear there was also steel. We learned early that to falter was to vanish, not merely in body but in memory. No songs, no records, no shrines. Only silence. That silence was a terror more potent than death. To avoid it, we sharpened ourselves, pressed harder in prayer, and swallowed every doubt until it became fuel for the fire of our devotion. The Black Templars are not merciful. They are not gentle shepherds guiding lost lambs. They are the Emperor's black wolves, and those who cannot run with the pack are devoured. Failure is not tolerated, and pity is not given. I carry Malric's memory with me even now. His laugh, his boastful talk of the crusades he would fight, the way he swore he'd carve his name into the stars. All gone in a breath, swallowed by the chapter's need for strength. The Emperor gained another ember for his eternal fire. I gained another scar etched deep in memory. The day of truth dawned not with fanfare, but with silence. The fortress monastery stirred like some ancient war machine, its bells tolling low and heavy. I was led through vaulted corridors lined with relics, each one a testament to battles fought across 1,000 worlds. The air smelled of incense and oil, and I felt the weight of countless crusades pressing down upon my shoulders. We survivors, so few of us remained that we no longer needed counting, were stripped bare and marched into the Chapel of Oaths. It was a cavernous chamber where the light of 100 candles glimmered off stained glass depictions of the Emperor triumphant. At the far end stood the Marshal, his armor black as night, his blade resting point first upon the stone. Chaplains flanked him, their Crozius Arcanum humming with restrained fury. We were made to kneel. The ritual was simple in its words, but infinite in its weight. One by one, each of us recited the vow that would bind us forever. I swear upon my blood, my soul, and my eternal service, that I shall never know peace until the enemies of the Emperor are utterly destroyed. I am his sword, his shield, his wrath made manifest. From this moment unto eternity, I am a Templar, and I shall crusade until death claims me. As I spoke those words, the world seemed to still. My voice echoed in the chamber, weaving itself into the litany of countless warriors who had sworn before me. When the Marshal lowered his blade and touched it lightly upon my bowed head, the weight of history pressed me flat against the stone floor. And then the transformation began. The squires brought forth the armor, black as the void, etched with scripture, plates that seemed far too heavy for mortal flesh. Yet when I stood and it was fitted to me, it felt like a second skin, as though the steel itself had been waiting for me since the dawn of time. Chains bound the armor across my chest, their cold bite a constant reminder that faith is the only key to freedom. I was given no name, for my old life had burned away. From this day forward, I was an initiate, bound to a neophyte's path, sworn to shadow a sworn brother as my mentor. He stood waiting at the edge of the chapel, his presence vast, his armor scarred from unnumbered wars. His hand upon my shoulder was like a weight of stone, yet within it lay acceptance. The Marshal raised his sword high. You are no longer children of dust. You are Black Templars. You are the Emperor's vengeance. Rise, and take your place in the eternal crusade. The chamber thundered with voices as the chaplains roared the litanies of hate. The sound tore through me, a storm of faith and fury. My heart beat with the rhythm of the crusade itself, a drumbeat of endless war. There was no feast, no celebration, only preparation. The next day, we marched to the docking bays, where a crusade fleet hung waiting like an iron constellation against the void. War banners snapped in the air, their script lit by the red glow of launch beacons. Bolters were pressed into our hands, blades sheathed at our sides. As the engines of the strike cruiser roared, I realized the truth. There would never be a homecoming. No quiet days. No reprieve. We were cast upon the galaxy like burning brands, destined to fight until the very marrow of our bones turned to dust. And I welcomed it. Because to be a Black Templar was not to live, it was to burn. To burn brighter than any star, to scorch the heretic, the mutant, the Xenos, until only ash remained in the Emperor's name. My fear was gone. My doubt was gone. All that remained was fire, bound in flesh and faith. I am an initiate of the Black Templars. I am eternal war. The Black Templars do not forge warriors in the manner of other chapters. They do not rely upon tests of intellect, political maneuvering, or long centuries of careful upbringing. Their method is simpler, harsher, and infinitely more unforgiving. Those who seek to join their ranks are stripped of all comfort, all identity, and all weakness. They are ground to dust in trials of flame, steel, and shadow. They are tempted by the whispers of the warp and broken by the weight of expectation. Only those who refuse to bend, even as their bodies bleed and their souls fracture, are considered worthy to stand as initiates. Even then, the journey does not end. To swear the vows of the Templars is to abandon peace forever. The black armor is not protection but a prison, chains across the chest, a constant reminder that the only freedom lies in the Emperor's service. To become a Black Templar is to cast oneself into a fire that never dies, to march upon an eternal road that ends only in death. But in that sacrifice lies a strange kind of glory. For though the galaxy is vast and cruel, though the warp hungers and enemies swarm beyond counting, the Black Templar does not waver. His purpose is clear, his duty eternal. He is the Emperor's wrath-given form. And for those who endure, who walk from the crucible alive, there is no greater honor. So remember this. The next time you see the black cross upon a field of white, know that behind it stands a warrior forged in pain, sharpened by faith, and bound to a crusade that shall never end. The Emperor protects. More stories await.